Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Interagency Digital Equity Grant Information Session. I'm Maggie Woods, and I'm a Digital Equity Manager in the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. And just so that you know where we sit in state government, so we are under the Department of Information Technology in the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity. So our sister office, the Broadband Infrastructure Office, is focused on getting the infrastructure, broadband infrastructure access to everyone across the state of North Carolina. They have some very large grant programs like the Great Grant Program, which you might be familiar with, whereas our office is focused on all of the other elements of the digital divide, which we will get into in a moment. So let's move on to the next slide, and I can tell you what to expect from this session today. So we are going to start with definitions. I think it's always good just to make sure that we are all in agreement about what are we talking about when we say digital equity and digital inclusion. And then I will provide an overview of the grant and its requirements and walk you through what we're expecting in an application. And then finally, we'll have some time for Q&A. The last info sessions, we've had some really good discussion. And so we do hope that you have questions for us. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, you can type it in the chat. We will get to it at the end. But you can also unmute yourself at the end, raise your hand, and we'll actually unmute you. It can take a little moment for you to get unmuted, but we promise we'll get it done for you. And then you can ask your question so the whole group can hear you. So whatever you feel most comfortable with. So in total, you'll hear me talk for about 15-20 minutes, and then the rest of the session is really for you to ask the questions that you have, which is important since our deadline is coming up. So let's move on to the next slide to talk through definitions. So when we say digital equity, we mean all individuals and communities that have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So digital equity is the goal. It's the goal that our entire division is working towards every single day. And the way we reach digital equity is through digital inclusion. It's the activities and policies that we create to develop a more digitally equitable North Carolina. And digital inclusion has 5 key elements, and I'll walk through those 5 key elements. The first is access to affordable high-speed internet. And the key word here is affordable, because you may have access to the internet, but if you can't afford it, you're not able to use it and reap the benefits that it has to offer. The second is access to a device that meets the needs of a user. Typically, we mean a computer, laptop, sometimes a tablet. We typically do not mean a smartphone. Smartphones, you all know it's hard to do your homework on a smartphone. It's hard to do your work on a smartphone. Smartphones also have data plans. And if you reach that data limit, if that's how you're using, if you're using that device for your sole source of internet and you go over that data limit, it can be very expensive. So we typically mean a computer, laptop, sometimes a tablet. Then you must also have access to digital training, digital literacy training, and digital skills training. So do you know how to use that internet? Do you know how to use the device? And when we talk about digital literacy, of course, we're talking about a spectrum, right? So it's not just, can you, basic digital literacy is, can you turn on a computer? Can you open an email? Can you send an email? But digital literacy moves up, particularly as you think about upskilling and moving into a different job or career pathway. So, do you know how to use Excel? That's one kind of digital skill that could open up pathways to you. Do you know how to do database software management? That's another skill that could move you up on the career ladder. Do you know how to code? So all of us are somewhere along that digital literacy spectrum, and it's a really important component to digital equity. The fourth component is quality technical assistance or technical support. So what happens if your computer breaks? If something's not working right, do you have someone that you can reach out to, a trusted resource that can help you solve that issue so you can continue to use your computer, to use your device? And then finally, this is kind of from the macro level, but are applications and online content designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. So is a website easy to use as a user? Is it in the proper languages it needs to be? Is it done in a way that's accessible to people with disabilities? So that's all the things that we're looking at in that fifth category. So these are the 5 elements that represent digital inclusion. And it's within each of these elements that we're looking for people to apply to through this digital equity grant. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll talk through a little bit about how these funds kind of sit. Like, where did these funds come from? So these funds are from American Rescue Plan Act funds. Our division received over $1 billion in allocation from the most recent budget last November. Most of those funds are going to the infrastructure side. So our colleagues in the Broadband Infrastructure Office have rolled out the GREAT grant. There's some other grants coming down the line to ensure that every North Carolinian has access to the internet. But in an unprecedented support for digital equity, our office was allocated $50 million of those funds. So this grant program comes from that $50 million. And so let's move on to the next slide and talk more specifically about this grant program. So this grant program has 2 phases. The first phase is the one that we're talking about today, the Interagency Digital Equity Funding Program, which launched this fall. And this program, we expect to fund $10 million, and we're looking to fund large, scalable programs that support the entire state or a region or more than one county. When I say more than one county, really, it would truly just mean more than one county. So for some folks, you might be serving a region of the state, and it makes real sense. You know your geographic region. Some agencies, you might be thinking about the entire state. But there also could be agencies or universities that want to develop pilot programs. So you might choose 5 or 10 counties that aren't necessarily a region, but are more than one county. So that's what we mean by more than one county. If you have questions, let me know. And then eligible entities in this round are universities, community colleges, and state agencies. And we'll talk a lot more about eligibility in just a moment. Phase 2 of this grant program will roll out in winter 2023. And this is a capacity building grant program that's really meant to get at the local level. So to help at the local level to develop or expand digital equity programs in communities across North Carolina. It will likely require partnerships between local municipalities or local governments and community-based organizations. There's a lot more information that will come out about phase 2 in the coming months. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to talk to you about it offline, but just expect that more will come out. But today we're focused on the Interagency Digital Equity Funding Program. So let's get into the specifics, moving to the next slide. So let's talk about eligibility and funding. So applicants for this round, the interagency round, must be an entity of North Carolina state government. So this includes all state government organizations. It's outlined in a web page. You can click on it on our website and just confirm that you are indeed an entity of the state of North Carolina. It also includes University of North Carolina system or individual schools, universities, or centers within that system, and the North Carolina Community College system or individual schools, colleges, or centers within that system. Applicants can apply for up to $2 million. I will say that we expect to fund between 10 to 15 entities. So not every entity will be able to receive $2 million. That's not to discourage you from applying for something big and scalable that will make transformational change, though. Because we are within state agencies, state entities, we do have the opportunity to have a little bit more of a conversation after you've submitted your application. So this could be us calling you up and saying, hey, we think this is really important, but we can't fund you at your full amount. We're hoping not to have many of those phone calls. But it could also be, hey, this other agency and this university are doing really, applied to do really similar work or are bringing in similar partners. We want to let you know about each other. We think it would be beneficial for you to partner and work together. So we may also do some matchmaking as well, depending on what kinds of applications we receive. So hope to have a conversation even after you've submitted your application. We're asking that only one application per office be accepted. However, we will accept more than one application per agency or institution as long as they're a part of a separate office or division. And every group kind of defines this differently. But as an example, if we look at DHHS and we receive something from the Division on Aging, and then we receive an application also from the Office of Rural Health, both within DHHS, that's completely fine. However, we wouldn't accept two applications from the Office of Rural Health because they are the same office. If you have a question about this, please reach out, and I'm happy to answer that for you. The funding term is for 2 years. The start date and end date will be outlined in the signed contract between the funding recipients and NCDIT, but the funding term will likely run between January 1, 2023 and December 31st, 2024. It could be adjusted a little bit depending on when we're able to get contracts developed and signed, but that's something that we'll work through with those funding recipients. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about priority populations. So this grant program is focused on 8 key priority populations. So grant applications must prioritize one or more of the following groups. Low-income households, so households that are 150% of the federal poverty level or below. Individuals who primarily reside in a rural area. Aging residents. Incarcerated or second chance residents, reentry, justice involved, veterans, individuals with disabilities, individuals with a language barrier, including individuals who are English language learners or have low levels of literacy, and individuals who are members of a racial or ethnic minority group. And I'll say these categories align really closely with the categories that the federal government has asked us to prioritize in our digital equity planning process that is launching this fall. So we'll be spending a year developing a digital equity plan for the state. And so these priority populations align with who we'll be focused on in that program as well. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about examples of projects. Now, we don't want to be prescriptive. We know that you all have a much better sense of the populations that you serve. You understand their needs and may have some really interesting creative ideas. But because the term digital equity is fairly new, even in the field, we wanted to give you some examples of projects that could be eligible for funding. But don't think this is a full comprehensive list. So an example could be developing a digital navigator program to help community members get connected, use digital tools or devices, and access digital skills classes. So a digital navigator is kind of like a healthcare navigator, but for your digital needs. It could be developing digital literacy and digital skills courses and trainings. It could be supporting local coalitions to develop and implement municipal or regional digital inclusion plans. It could be expanding device lending programs or device distribution programs, or increasing the accessibility or usability of online digital content. You can also use this program, these grant funds for staff time or consulting services to support these digital inclusion or digital equity projects. That's maybe the question I've gotten most often is, can we use this for staff? And the answer is yes. This can also be used for telehealth programming. So you could create telehealth rooms in libraries, schools, or other community spaces, or other projects related to internet affordability, devices, digital literacy, or technical support and assistance. So again, we're looking for creativity. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but gives you kind of a sense of the kinds of programs that could be eligible. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about how to apply. So applications are due next Friday. So 5 p.m. on October 28th, and it is a two-step process to apply. You first have to complete an online application form, and then you have to submit a single application document, which includes the cover page, project narrative, timeline, and budget, into a single PDF and email it to me. Single PDF being the word there, so please don't attach more than one attachment. We're trying to make it simple on you, but also simple on us to be able to review it and organize it. I'll say that the online application form, we've made a couple changes due to some feedback. We've made it really clear. So we asked like your basic information, what your name is, email, phone number, what organization you or agency you represent. But we also ask what priority populations is your application covering. We ask you to list them, so that's easy for us to kind of note that, yes, you've hit that category. We also ask for how much you are applying for in that application form. So in addition to that form, with this PDF document that you're sending to me in one PDF, it has a couple of requirements. So we'll include a cover page. On the guidelines, it tells you what we need on that cover page. I don't think I need to cover that today, but if you have questions, let me know. It'll also include a project narrative. So this project narrative must not exceed 4 pages. It must be single-spaced, 12-point font with 1-inch margins. The cover page, timeline, and budget are not included in that 4-page limit. And I'm going to walk through each of these elements in a moment, but the project narrative should include a scope of the project, the area and population served, intended outcomes and metrics, partners and local engagement, and potential obstacles. So we'll talk through all of those in just a moment. We also want to see a project timeline. So again, this is 2 years. So what are the major activities that you plan to accomplish over those 2 years? And we're particularly interested to know, what do you plan to accomplish within that first year? We're really looking for projects that can get off the ground quickly, that can build maybe on programs or momentum that you already have. So what can be accomplished within that first year? And then we want to see a project budget. We do provide a template. We have Mark Swan on the call who will be able to answer any of your financial questions today if you have them. We're also happy to go back and forth via email or through phone calls to talk through some of those financial questions. But the template is fairly easy to fill in. We tried to make it simple for all of you. Let's move on to the next slide and talk through the elements of the project narrative. So the project narrative has 5 elements. The first is the scope of the project. And I'll say with all of these bullet points, please answer the questions in all the bullet points. We have an external evaluation committee that will be reviewing this, and they will be, a lot of the evaluation is how have you answered these questions. And so please make sure that you're fully answering all of the bullet points. So for the scope of the project, provide a detailed description of all major project activities, describe in detail how the project activities will advance digital equity. Describe your entity's experience working in digital equity, if applicable. If your entity doesn't have experience working in digital equity, how will you build that experience? How will you pull in experts or pull in partners who can help ensure that you are building that expertise? I will say your agency may have worked in digital equity previously. You just may not have called it that. Like I said, it's a new term. So that's fine. Maybe you called it something else, but you have actually done the work before. So in the scope of the project, describe your entity's staff capacity for this project. Describe any positions you plan to hire to increase your capacity. Someone's asking in the chat, where can you receive a link to that online page? It is on our website, and the last slide has our website. It has everything that you need for the guidelines, FAQs, as well as links to that online application form and how to apply. So we'll make sure that you get that at the end. Okay, so for the project narrative, the second part is area and population served. So what is the geographic area that your project will serve? Who will your project serve? So speaking about populations and what are their biggest digital needs. So this is really where we're looking for some data. What do you know about this group in terms of what they need from a digital inclusion perspective? And then which priority populations outlined above will your project serve? And what is your experience serving these populations? And if you don't have experience, who are you bringing in as partners to ensure that you have the trust of that community? So let's move on to the next slide and talk through the final 3 sections of the project narrative. So the third section is intended outcomes and metrics. So what are your intended outcomes and metrics for the project, and how will you define success? What tangible activities will you accomplish within that first year? If you didn't know, we wanted to know what you can accomplish within that first year. Again, we've asked for this in the timeline. It's also something we're asking for in the project narrative. And then how will you share your learnings outside of your agency? This is important to us because we're trying to see what can be accomplished through this large investment in digital equity. We want to share best practices across the state. I mentioned that we're embarking on a digital equity planning process. As a part of that, we need to identify best practices that we might want to put into an implementation phase. And so understanding what you're learning is going to be really important to us, but it's also going to be important to other state agencies, universities, community colleges, and beyond across the state. The fourth section of the project narrative is partners and local engagement. So include a list of partners involved in the project and describe their role. If all partners aren't identified yet, please describe the process for identifying partners. We know that you haven't had a tremendous amount of time to put this application together, and so you may not have everyone identified yet, but tell us how, who you expect will be involved if they haven't been identified, and how you will identify them. And then finally, the final section is potential obstacles. So discuss any barriers or obstacles you might encounter. We know that particularly when you're supporting marginalized populations, that there will be barriers. And so just having you do that exercise of thinking through those and thinking through how you might address those will be really important to us. So let's move on to this final slide. This has my information on it. Please reach out. If I haven't answered your questions today, I'm here throughout the process to answer emails or to jump on a phone call, a Teams call. That's what I'm here for. So please use me as a resource. And then as promised, this is a link to the website that you can find all the information about this digital equity program and FAQs, guidelines, links to the application and application instructions. So now it's time for some Q&A. And I do see we have a comment in the chat attempting to bring in church and retirement home learning spaces. That sounds great, Ms. Gibson, and would be happy to talk through that, your project in more detail. So this is really what's open to you all. So you can type your questions in the chat. You can also raise your hand and we will unmute you. It can take a moment to unmute you, but we will unmute you and you can ask your question aloud. There are no stupid questions. We can also, some people have used this time to talk about the idea that they're exploring and see if it's eligible and kind of talk through it a little bit. So I'm going to stop talking for a moment and see what questions there are. Okay, we did get a question from Ginger saying, our community college has a foundation which is a separate 501c3. Is our foundation an eligible grantee? Ooh, this is a good question. My thought is no. Mark, do you have an idea on this? If not, Ginger, we may need to get back to you on that.
Yeah, we're probably gonna have to come back to you. The logic behind being a state entity is to allow us to be able to, within state rules, be able to give you money in a easier way. And I'm not sure that the 501c3 would be eligible.
so let's, Ginger, if you could send me an email, that would be really helpful, because I know there's like different universities have foundations that are the ones who receive the funds, and so, but they're very tied, and so they wouldn't be separate, I don't think. But you're bringing up a really good question, so please reach out, and we will work to get an answer for you. Okay. All right, so Ms. Gibson says, do you have any advice regarding the application process for church and or retirement home partners? Do you want to unmute yourself or and give a little bit more context for what you're asking here? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to make sure that I'm answering your question effectively. Can we get you unmuted?
Yes, hi. Thank you so
Hi.
much for this opportunity. And yes, I have done some of this work before. I would
Wonderful.
like to particularly focus on nonprofits such as churches and or retirement home partners, because they are a different type of nonprofit entity. So perhaps I should send you an email also. But the churches, they involve, other than the learning space, they involve ministers, they involve teachers that are particularly obligated to the church, not to a school or university.
Right. So thank you for that clarification. So for this grant, do you represent a state agency or university or community college, Ms. Gibson?
I represent a school that is being reconstructed, and they need new wiring for broadband. They have come up with other costs. Basically, their telephone service has already started looking for funds to provide the optic fiber for the project. I really don't have time to get into the details here.
It's fine.
Perhaps you can expound upon whether or not you can partner. Like you said, you may be able to maybe contribute half or a certain percentage. Do you have already a list of concerns for these types of partners? Have you already determined that you will only give a certain percentage to these type of nonprofits? Have you already considered percentages for schools? As a matter of fact, this is a public school area. The partners in this nonprofit, they have already obtained the title to the real estate. So it no longer belongs to the state. They are reverting back to a previous era in time where it was a high school. It's no longer a high school.
Okay, let's definitely find a time to talk after the offline. I appreciate your question. So there will be a round that is open to nonprofit organizations. That'll be the round that opens in winter. So a lot more information will come out about that. Schools will also be eligible entities at that time. So right now we're looking for state entities, so universities, community colleges, or state agencies, but those agencies can partner and have beneficiaries or subawards to nonprofits and other groups. And we do know that churches are on the front lines of the digital divide, particularly during the pandemic. And so I'd be happy to work with you and think through the best ways to engage those church and nonprofit partners, depending on where you're located. We do have a wide network across the state, but I'll just say that this round is focused on those state entities, but the next round will be focused on the local people. So nonprofits, local municipalities, counties, community-based organizations.
Okay, yes, thanks. And we'll connect.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your question.
You're welcome.
What other questions do we have? It looks like Samantha asked, our Civil War partners have expressed concerns over federal funding reporting. What kind of reporting will these grants require? Are the funds considered federal or state? So they're federal. This is a really good question, Samantha. We will be outlining all of those requirements in the contract with the applicants who are receiving funding. It'll likely require, at least for the first year, quarterly reports. Those reports would come from the applicant to us, but of course, the applicant, like you all, would need to receive reporting from your subawards. So I will say I understand the concerns of your potential subawards partners about federal funding reporting requirements. We're trying to make it as simple as possible, but we are they're federal funds, and so we have to treat them in the way that we're being asked to treat them. So there will likely be quarterly reports, and we'll need both financial and programmatic reports. But we will be available for technical assistance and support throughout the process. I don't know if that fully answered your question. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a follow-up.
I just want to bump in here and mention that this is revenue replacement funds. So it has a little less stringent reporting, like things like FFATA, which I don't fully understand, but it doesn't apply to this. So it's not all the way uniform guidance. It's a much more scaled down. Mostly you just need to be following your state rules, but you need to be able to fully report.
That's a really good point, Mark. Thank you for that. This is revenue replacement. Thanks, Samantha. What other questions do we have? Looking through the chat. Remember, you can raise your hand if you have a question. Or any other questions, or do people have want to talk about an idea? I know we're getting close to the deadline, but an idea that you're exploring. I'll say one question that we've gotten recently that someone was confused by was whether one, we've gotten the question, can you have subawards as a part of this? And yes, you can. Samantha just asked about that. And two, there's been some question about, do subawards also have to be state entities? Since state entities, universities, and community colleges are the eligible entities here. And the answer is no. So subawards can be nonprofits. They can be councils of government. They can be local government even. So they don't have to, since they're not applying, they don't have the same rules as the eligible entity. So just wanted to clarify that. What other questions do people have? Mark, anything more they should know about the template, or about any of the financials? We talked about this being revenue replacement.
If there's not direct questions, that item you just mentioned, we're hoping to learn a lot from these grants. And one of those things being what's the best way to grant outside of state government and make sure we're including the right partners. So we appreciate y'all joining in and finding those creative solutions.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for us to hear, what are best practices? How are you going to share your work beyond just your agency or your university? Because this is big, it's important. We hope that this program will, be transformational for North Carolinians across the state. And so we appreciate the work that you're doing, and we hope to learn from you and to support you through the process. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Anything else that's confusing to you as you read the guidelines or the FAQs? That's helpful feedback to us as well. Since I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything else in the chat, I'm going to start to wrap up, but if you're still formulating a question, you can raise your hand right now. You can type in the chat. I'll still see it. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. We know that you are very busy people doing really important work all across the state. And so appreciate you taking the time to learn more about this. Please use that website as a resource. We will also be updating the FAQs as we get questions that we think need to be shared out. I'm always available to be a contact for you, to jump on a phone call or to answer your last minute questions as you finish this. Ms. Gibson asked about who's Crystal Dickerson. Crystal is our amazing communications manager who is ensuring that this webinar, this info session goes without a hitch. So she's been fabulous. She's our behind the scenes. But please reach out if you have any other follow-up questions, and we really appreciate all the work that you are doing across the state, and together we're going to be able to close the digital divide. So thank you, everyone.